Today, we're going to dive into a story that honestly has all the makings of a spy movie. You've got a massive international airport, you've got state secrets, and you've got a gigantic security failure. But here's the thing. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of the Heathrow Airport data breach, and it's a pretty powerful cautionary tale about how modern security can fall apart in the most surprisingly simple way.
So, let me just ask you this. What do you think is the biggest threat to a place like Heathrow? I mean, it's one of the busiest airports on the planet. Your mind probably goes straight to, sophisticated cyber attacks from state-sponsored hackers, or maybe some kind of complex terrorist plot. And look, those are absolutely real threats. But the incident we're talking about today, it started with something way, way more common.
You see, the biggest threat isn't always some genius hacker in a dark room. As this whole case proves, sometimes it's just a simple mistake. It's human error. The culprit behind this whole massive security scare was a single lost USB stick. That's it. Something small enough to get lost in a coat pocket nearly brought one of the world's most critical travel hubs to its knees.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 2017. We're on a street somewhere in London. A guy's just walking along and spots something on the sidewalk. A small, totally normal-looking USB drive. He picks it up and later, trying to do the right thing and find the owner, he plugs it into a public library computer. And what he finds is just staggering.
This timeline really shows you how fast things can spin out of control. So first, some employee or maybe a contractor, they lose the drive. Then a random member of the public finds it. But instead of getting it back to the airport, it gets handed to a national newspaper who, of course, immediately realize what a massive story this is. And it's only then, through the media, that Heathrow Airport finally gets alerted that they have a catastrophic security failure on their hands. By then, the data was already out there.
So the big question is, what was actually on this little USB drive that was so unbelievably important? Well, this is where the story turns from a simple mistake into a full-blown, nightmare-level security crisis. The person who found it didn't just stumble on a few work documents. Oh no, they basically found the keys to the kingdom.
165. That's how many separate confidential files were just sitting there on that one single drive. And we're not talking about a couple of memos saved in the wrong place. This was a huge, organized library of highly sensitive security data, a literal treasure trove of information that should have been under the tightest lock and key.
And when you look at the specifics, it gets even crazier. We're talking about the exact routes security patrols take and the schedules they keep, information that would let someone know exactly where to go to avoid them. There were detailed maps showing every single CCTV camera, maybe even highlighting potential blind spots. Details on how to get through different high-security ID checkpoints. And maybe the most shocking of all, the protocols for protecting VIPs, up to and including the Queen. In the wrong hands, this is literally a blueprint for an attack.
And here it is, the most critical and, frankly, the most unbelievable part of this whole story. All 165 of these incredibly sensitive files were completely unprotected. There was no password required. The data wasn't encrypted, meaning it wasn't scrambled into unreadable code or anything. Nope. Anyone who found this USB stick could just plug it into any computer and see everything instantly. It's just a mind-boggling oversight.
A mistake this big doesn't just get swept under the rug. This one simple act, losing a USB drive, had serious, real-world consequences for Heathrow Airport. It hit their finances, their reputation, and their entire security operation.
Let's start with the money. The Information Commissioner's Office, or the ICO, they're the UK's big data protection watchdog. They launched a full investigation. And they came down hard, levying a pretty hefty fine of £120,000 against Heathrow for what they called a serious failure to keep data secure.
But that fine? That was really just the beginning. The reputational damage was huge. You had national headlines everywhere questioning how competent Heathrow security really was. That creates a massive crisis of public trust. Then you've got the ongoing security risk. I mean, sure, they got the drive back, but who knows if that data was copied first? And operationally, the airport was forced to do a massive, expensive overhaul of all its security and data procedures. The real cost was so much bigger than just that fine.
So if you want to stop something like this from ever happening again, you really have to dig in and figure out why it happened in the first place. And this wasn't just about one person being careless. The investigation found a whole bunch of systemic failures in how Heathrow handled data security.
And it really all boils down to these three things. First, just poor data management.
Allowing this kind of information on a portable, unencrypted device, that's just a fundamental mistake. Second, a serious lack of staff awareness. Get this, the ICO found that only 2% of the staff had actually done the required data safety training. 2%. And third, there was no real control over devices. No effective policy to manage or monitor who was using USB drives. It was a total failure of process, people, and technology.
Okay, so all of this brings us to what's probably the most important part of the story. What can we all learn from this mess? Because the Heathrow case isn't just some crazy story. It's a huge wake-up call for any organization out there, big or small, about the absolute basics of data security.
So here are the big takeaways that apply to pretty much everyone. First, encrypt your sensitive data, especially if it's on a laptop or USB stick. It's your last line of defense. Second, make security training regular and mandatory for everybody. A policy is useless if nobody knows it exists. Third, enforce strict policies on devices. If people don't need to use USB drives, then just block them. And finally, have a clear plan for what to do when, not if, a breach happens, and make sure you're up to speed on laws like GDPR. These are the building blocks of a solid security culture.
This quote from the case study just hits the nail on the head. We spend so much time worrying about the external threats, right? The sophisticated hackers. But the reality is, so many data breaches are basically inside jobs. Not malicious, just accidental. They come from simple human error and a lack of basic security hygiene. The biggest threat is often the one you're not even looking for.
So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this one thought. The entire Heathrow breach started with one lost USB drive. It really makes you think, doesn't it? We all have them on our keychains, sitting in a drawer. So the real question is, how secure is the data you're carrying around right now? What's on your drive? And what would happen if you lost it tomorrow?